All right, here's two snippets from videos that are on YouTube. Lethal Injection, The Story of Vaccination, and a Wayne Madsen reporting on the 09 swine flu epidemic and how it was a mix, a bioweapon. And it's not just these viruses, these as bioweapons, but also the vaccinations that follow. All right, I'm just gonna. It all ties in here.
So the real question on everyone's mind is mandatory vaccination possible? To answer this question, let's look at the government's own legislation. In 1946, the U.S. Public Health Service was established and Executive Order 9708 was signed, listing the communicable diseases where quarantines can be used. In 1946 and 2003, cholera, diphtheria, tuberculosis, typhoid, smallpox, yellow fever, and viral hemorrhagic fevers were added to the list. On April 4, 2003, Executive Order 13295 added SARS to the forced vaccination list. Then, on April 1, 2005, Executive Order 13295 added influenza caused by novel or re-emergent influenza viruses that are causing or have the potential to cause a pandemic. The President gave the Secretary of Health and Human Services the power to quarantine at his or her discretion. The Secretary of Health and Human Services now has the power to arrange for the apprehension and examination of persons reasonably thought to be infected. A cough or a fever could put a person at risk for being quarantined for an extended period of time without recourse. On January 28, 2003, Project BioShield was introduced during Bush's State of the Union address. This created permanent and indefinite funding authority to develop medical countermeasures. The National Institutes of Health was given the authority to speed approval of drugs and vaccines. Emergency approval of fast-tracked drugs and vaccines can now be given without the regular course of safety testing. On December 17, 2006, Division E, the Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act, was created. This was added as an addendum to the Defense Appropriations Bill, H.R. 2863, at 11:20 p.m. on a Saturday night.
Midnight.
Long after House committee members had signed off on the bill and gone home for the holidays.
Just like they did with the Federal Reserve Act.
Under Section B, Paragraph 1, it states, "The Secretary of Health and Human Services can make a determination that a disease, health condition, or threat constitutes a public health emergency. He or she may then recommend the manufacture, testing, development, administration, or use of one or more covered countermeasures." A covered countermeasure is defined as a pandemic product, vaccine, or drug. This act also provides complete liability protection for all drugs, vaccines, or biological products deemed a covered countermeasure and used for an outbreak of any kind.
The pharmaceutical company and through CDC also has complete liability protection for just childhood vaccines in general. They're not even considered like drugs. They're they give it some name like biologics, something like that.
Complete liability protection has been given to drug companies for any product used for any public health emergency declared by the Secretary of Health and Human Services. Pharmaceutical corporations are now protected from all accountability unless criminal intent to do harm can be proven by the injured party. They are protected from liability even if they know the drug will be harmful to your health. You, however, have no protection or recourse at all from a government who stands to profit from forced mandatory vaccination.
You know, we've asked for U.S. attorneys' opinions. Is it illegal to create a recreated, weaponized 1918 virus? Is what Tom and Berger's team doing, is it illegal? The Owl's response, no, under the guidelines of the U.S. Department of Defense, it's not illegal at all.
This is Dr. Truott and a Joseph Moshe, M-O-S-H-E, I believe is how you spell his last name, microbiologist, Mossad agent, tried to call in, or did call in to his show, and was warning about the '09 swine flu or swine flu vaccination, or both, and tying in with the Spanish flu recreated, and he was taken into custody. He was found and stopped and tasered and all that.
They have the rights and the abilities to do that. And it's not illegal to create a vaccine to fight against it. Just look at what happened in anthrax during the Gulf War. We supplied the anthrax to Iraq and Saddam Hussein, and so when we go in there, we have to get vaccines for all of our soldiers to protect against the weapon that we created for them, okay? So it's not illegal to do all that. In fact, the military wants those vaccines to have in stockpile, so that's not illegal.
Now, shockingly, this isn't the only time that we can see in the U.S. Code where the government feels it has the right to poison, irradiate, and use humans as test subjects. Let's take a look at some of these in the U.S. Code.
Scanning.
Let's look at Title 50, Chapter 32. Listed as the Chemical and Biological Warfare Program, we go to Section 1520A, where the government lists restrictions on use of human subjects for testing of chemical or biological agents. Part A reads, Prohibited Activities. The Secretary of Defense may not conduct, directly or by contract, 1. Any test or experiment involving the use of a chemical agent or biological agent on a civilian population, or 2. Any other testing of a chemical agent or biological agent on human subjects. Well, that certainly sounds like a good thing until we read Part B.
The but.
Under exceptions, it states, subject to subsections C, D, and E of this section, the prohibition in subsection A of this section does not apply to a test or experiment carried out for any of the following purposes. 1. Any peaceful purpose that is related to a medical, therapeutic, pharmaceutical, agricultural, industrial, or research activity. Remember, we're talking about humans like you and me here. 2. Any purpose that is directly related to protection against toxic chemicals or biological weapons and agents. And 3. Any law enforcement purpose, including any purpose related to riot control. Under Part C, it states, informed consent required, and this is very important. The Secretary of Defense may conduct a test or experiment described in subsection B of this section only if informed consent to the testing was obtained from each human subject in advance of the testing on that subject. Now, it is important to note here that your consent is always assumed in all of these experiments. The only way to protest this type of treatment, irradiation, and chemical exposure by your government is to verbally and in writing not consent.
Okay, this is like a 2.5-hour documentary, but it is loaded with like so many aspects of the law, vaccines, bioweapons, all that.
About how the H1N1 virus came to exist here in
the 09
this country.
Scare.
Well, it's very apparent that there's 3 research centers involved in the development in a laboratory of the 1918 Spanish flu which was actually resurrected. The proper name should be the Jurassic flu. It was resurrected from the DNA extracted from an Inuit woman who died of this pandemic in 1918 in Brevig Mission, Alaska. The material was taken to several
They actually dug up her body in the permafrost because they knew she died from the Spanish flu. They told the natives there that it was going to be like used for good.
laboratories, and what I've discovered is that three particular laboratories are very much involved in this research. The University of Madison at Wisconsin, the National Microbiology Laboratory in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and something that might surprise a lot of people, the St. Jude's Veterinary Research Laboratory in Memphis, Tennessee. So we have three places now that seem to be ground zero for the research that led to the redevelopment or resurrection of the 1918 Spanish flu.
And I mean, how exactly did this happen? This is the 21st century. I mean, how could these gene sequences get manipulated and then be disseminated throughout the country?
Well, apparently what we are saying is this could have been the product of some overzealous research on the part of the research scientists, the microbiologists, or there may be something more sinister. The University of Wisconsin in Madison has an interest in a company called FluGen, which stands to make an awful lot of money from a method that they developed to deliver the vaccine for H1N1. The other thing is in 2001, at the height of the anthrax attacks in this country, a Harvard microbiologist named Dr. Don Wiley, who was on the scientific advisory board of St. Jude's, died. They say he jumped off a bridge into the Mississippi River in Memphis after he attended a banquet in his honor.
And also, 3 years ago, I think it is now, a CDC worker, a top worker, Timothy Cunningham, was found drowned in water nearby his home. And this was pre the flu vaccine coming out, and there's speculation that he was warning about the flu vaccine.
All indications are that was not a suicide. Even the Shelby County, Tennessee coroner came to the conclusion that it could have been a murder, but it was never investigated by the FBI as a murder. What I do know about Dr. Wiley is after his death, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police contacted the Memphis police with a story about bioterrorism, and it involved the National Microbiology Laboratory in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Yeah, the war on terror. We're looking at the wrong groups of people.
The centers that has been very key in the development of this new strain of H.
They've had smallpox. I will leave links to all this. I know I'm interrupting it. Let's see. Smallpox was discovered, vials of smallpox samples in cardboard boxes. Workers who were doing work inside the CDC in Atlanta, Georgia, said there were vials on the ground. And there's, I think it's up to level 4 levels for security for labs, testing, weapons, and biological agents. It's a mess.
H1N1.
So this is some pretty scandalous stuff that you're saying. I mean, is it being investigated, and how can, the United States prevent this from happening in the future?
Well, I think what we have here is a situation with bioethics. They talk a good game in the medical research community about bioethics, but it doesn't seem like there's any method to enforce the ethics. And if, in fact, this was developed to make money for certain biopharmaceutical companies, of course, this is a case of bioterrorism.
It's never just one thing. It's, yes, there's money involved. Pharmaceutical companies gain to make money, and it's also genocide.
It may be bioterrorism soft, but many people have died around the world from this. Right now, it doesn't appear that the FBI or any other law enforcement agency is actively investigating it, which brings up the anthrax case, which some people say that was not adequately investigated either.
And so there were obviously some major things that went wrong with this research, but did anything good come out of it that we could maybe use now? that it's been, disseminated.
The research community, of course, involved with this research will say that this H1N1 was redeveloped as a method to combat a resurrection of the pandemic.
Yeah, just like the war on terror. We're gonna go over there into the Middle East and get the terrorists before they come to America. They use the media as an arm of the, I wouldn't even say government, as an arm of the military complex to keep pushing forward. In 2009, I remember there was a big push. That was the first I ever heard of pregnant women being pushed to get flu shots. There was a 2,500% increase in stillbirths that year. And because before that, it was like pregnant women and moms, they should never get any medication unless they absolutely needed it. They pushed it on children. And they really strongly pushed it through the mainstream media.
1918. But we have several cases. We had a case in May where a scientist from the National Microbiology Laboratory in Winnipeg was caught bringing Ebola and HIV DNA across the U.S.-Canadian